The next session is about timeframes and balance for the eDiscovery professionals. Is there a work-life balance? I actually think that's kind of a quasi way of putting it. How do we make lawyers understand the impossible demands that they're making on the litigation support department and people inside the litigation support department? As the volumes and complexity of data has increased, there tends to be a lot more processing time at the start and at the end of a matter/document review. The following will be discussed. How does one balance the time frames and still, it says have a life, but I think it is not die, is another way of putting it. I was just saying I thank God that I'm selling software and I'm not doing litigation support. I like to be able to control my life much more than I would in your roles. And secondly, raising awareness to clients and lawyers about realistic timeframes for projects. I would like to introduce first Karan Mehta from Allens. He has a long history with Allens and with Epic before that. And with so, do you want to introduce everybody? Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning. I'm Karan Mehta. I work with Allens as the Applied Legal Technology Manager. I've been with them close to 9 years, and we're here talking about the elusive work-life balance. Some of us have it, or we at least think we do. Families and friends might disagree. And the rest of us are always trying to get that balance right. Got a fantastic panel with us today, and they've got lots of experience, so they'll share their strategies, some war stories, and their tips on getting this balance right. So let's start with meeting the panel.
Well, I guess I know most of the people in the room. I've been in professional services and for, let's say, the last 10 years, and recently the last 3 years switched over to a software company, which has been a refreshing change. So I guess we'll probably talk a little bit more about my work-life balance that I've managed to achieve now. But yes, I've certainly seen lots of different levels of work-life balance over the last 10 years between a few consulting firms, running my own business, and now in a software company. So I'll share those with you as we go.
Hi, I'm Angela Bunting. I also know quite a few of you in the room. I have a pretty long history, mainly up in Queensland, where we started eDiscovery services at a bureau. I then went to work for Michelle for quite some time, went over to Law and Order, which I don't know whether many people know. I worked remotely from Queensland for 8 years and struck quite a nice work-life balance, even though I said goodnight to most of this panel at 3 a.m, many nights, and then went on to work for Eddie, so on the software vendor side. So hopefully we'll share some insights on how I achieve that.
Hi everyone, I'm Ainsley Cox. I'm Head of Applied Legal Technology at King & Wood Mallisons. Before my life in eDiscovery, I was a solicitor, so I've had the opportunity or misfortune to see work-life balance on both sides of the coin there.
G'day, so Matthew Gollard from Gilbert & Tobin. Been there since August 2011, in the industry for 16 years. Not sure if I have a work-life balance, but anyway. So I'm probably at the other side of the spectrum. So.
Thanks, guys. I think I speak for most of the eDiscovery professionals in the room when I say, in today's day and age where eDiscovery professionals are faced with mega volumes, really complex matters, and clients demanding a quick response, and it's up to us how we define quick. Getting that balance right is quite hard, and especially when work is accessible 24/7, it's quite a challenge. I'd like this session to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to ask questions as we go along. Before getting into the discussion, I'd like to share a quick story with everyone. When preparing for this panel, I had emailed a potential panel member on LinkedIn. Their response came in at about 9 o'clock that evening. And as you know, push notifications pop it up on your phone. My wife happened to see it, turned to me with an excited face and said, "You should really attend this. They're talking about eDiscovery and work-life balance for those professionals. You will learn a lot. I was happy first because she finally figured out I work in the eDiscovery space. But the most difficult thing I had to do that night was tell her I'm not only on the panel, I'm actually leading the discussion. And the look on her face was priceless. So what is work-life balance? What does it mean? Different things to different people. Let's see what our panel has to say.
I guess I've spoken about this a fair bit with quite a few people, and my first thing that I'd like to point out is that the phrase work-life balance is wrong. I always tell people that, in fact, it should be life-work balance, because I don't exist to work, unfortunately, for my employer. And that, in fact, the concept that you are trying to balance life and work, again, is incorrect, that life is the bigger thing, and work is just a small component. So if you were to put it on a scale, it should tip in favour of life, not in favour of work. But really, what it is the ability to achieve what you need to achieve for your employer so that you're successful, so that they're successful, but actually be able to focus on the big things, which is your family, your friends, and what you do outside of work, and not be consumed by it.
I think also another part that's very important to having the social side of a life outside work is also putting time into your own sort of mental health and mental well-being, which might be partaking in sport or meditation or a hobby that just gives you that time back, where it's not you investing in your family or your children or friends or keeping up all that outside part. It can just be time for you, and I think that's probably the first bit that goes.
I guess an issue for us is the confidentiality of our matters, and you just can't discuss what we're doing outside of work. And so when every night you get a text saying, "Are you coming home?" And what do you say? You can't say, "Well, this client, this regulator, this other party, this court." So it's difficult at times.
Just on that, staying married has probably been my biggest challenge in eDiscovery.
I think for me, it's like Blair said, enjoying the more important things in life, and it's when you leave office, what is it? Sort of watching a movie, grocery shopping, those little things which make all the difference. So, what are some of the challenges? I think Angela, you touched on being married is one of the biggest challenges you faced. What are some of the other challenges you face on a day-to-day basis?
I guess keeping that time, one of the things I was fairly adamant about very early in the piece after working at a law firm was the time with my family had to be sacred. It was the time that I guaranteed to my husband that I'd be home and with him, not with him, but inside a matter and creating a new strategy for something that we were going to kill the other side with. And so creating that boundary with the employer was really important, and between 5 and 9 was my time that I spent, and they respected that because then I was online till all hours and I was up very early. So I think that's one of the key challenges I face. But once you are adamant about that and they're interested in outcomes, I think you gain that respect, especially from the teams that work with you.
Yeah, look, I think it becomes easier, I guess, as you get older. I think, one, you kind of gain some perspective, and two, you gain the respect of your colleagues, your clients, and what have you. So it becomes easier to have those conversations. But for me, I mean, spending 10 years working 7 till 7, I've got 4 kids on top of the marriage, so there are some pretty big home expectations there too. And spending initially, for those first 10 years in the eDiscovery space and the forensic space, of working a 12-hour day, coming home, and then still being online and responding to queries and checking systems and processing and all the wonderful things that we did. As I became older, I realised that that was actually a little bit unfair. That they were expecting me to do all the give, and there was no give from them. So the question from my perspective actually became, well, if I am doing your stuff in my time, when can I do my stuff in your time? And that balance that I've finally found, and hopefully it continues, is the fact that like Angela, she worked from home for 8 years. Well, I now work from home and have done for the last 3. Is that during my work day, I'm doing stuff both for myself and for my employer, which means that in the evening and on the weekends when I'm doing exactly the same thing, I'm quite happy to do that. So that's the balance. It shouldn't be an expectation that we're available 9 till 5 or 7 till 7 and then some. It needs to go both ways.
And I think on that, one of the issues with flexible working that is probably overlooked a lot is that what can be flexible working for a lawyer can be totally inflexible for the litigation support team. So the lawyer might want to go home at 5 p.m. and have dinner with their family and their kids, which is great, but you're still doing something for someone else who doesn't have kids, who wants to go out for dinner in a restaurant, so they want to get it all done by 7, so you finish that. And then the person who's gone home for dinner with their kids has come back online when you were thinking, oh, I'm done. And then you sort of run into the next time zone. So my only solution for addressing that is that there needs to be a open communication and consideration between everyone involved so that everyone can get the balance when they want to without actually causing someone else to be totally imbalanced by it.
Just a final point would be that we probably get emails each day till about 11 at night, and so you need to work out at what point do you start not responding, and so you're keeping an eye on monitoring, but testing the waters, that's a difficult one.
So in the eDiscovery space, there's quite a famous or an infamous request, which normally comes in at 6 p.m. on a Friday. It says, I need this for 9 a.m. Monday morning. How do you guys deal with that?
Outsource it.
Then from the outsource perspective, you negotiate. Is it really that urgent?
Look, I guess I'm lucky I don't have to deal with that one anymore. And it used to be push it down onto junior staff. I think probably unfairly, in the notion that I did my yards, they can do theirs. But realistically, it's negotiating with the client that's made that request. And a lot of it, I think, you need to try and avoid that question in the first place. And the only reason why they're saying that is because they figure that all you've got to do is press a couple of buttons and you can go home too. So they're not always fully aware of what's involved in getting that to them at 9 o'clock. Sometimes they just don't care. But if you take the time to educate your client about what's involved, then they're more likely to help you out and push back on their client. Because the reality is, do they need it at 9 o'clock? I think we've all done we've processed whatever, handed it over, or given them access or something like that, and then you get the first question on Wednesday, and you go and check and they haven't logged in, or the question is on Wednesday, my password's not working. Now, what? So yeah, there's that process that you have to take place.
Yeah, I think there's a real, learning education point on what's a real deadline and what's something where you just get in your inbox that request, I need this ASAP. One lawyer's ASAP will be in an hour and another lawyer's ASAP is Friday at the end of the next week. And so it's quite hard to work to imaginary deadlines if there isn't that upfront discussion about what are you actually needing and what are you doing, and let's have a chat.
But I guess we use triage as well, where we'll work out what do they want. Do we need to do it, or on the outsourcing point, is it a print job? So at what point can we get it where the truck's ready to back up with all the boxes and we leave it as a print request and doesn't involve us anymore?
They never underestimate the knowledge of your legal team. One famous request was, can you make the photocopier go faster? It doesn't work. So never underestimate their actual knowledge of what you do, because they're so caught up in what they do. They will more than likely bow down to help you get through it once they realise how much is in it.
I've been challenged back though, where I've said X process will require 6 hours, and I think I delivered it in 5. So the next time they went, but it only took 5 last time. And then that's why they then cut their time frame short. So, then they're not silly people.
I think being senior members of your teams, what's really expected of you guys in your roles, and what is your workplace doing to sort of help you get that life-work balance, as you put it?
Well, I guess, I have several different kind of experiences to draw on. So, talking about EDT now, we all pretty much work from home. So, it's quite different expectations depending on who's doing what and what the situation is. Me personally, I'm pretty much on call 24/7. Because if there's a technical issue that a client needs help with, and you get that something's not working, and you kind of need to understand, well, what's your deadline, what's going on. But at the same time, the majority of my clients understand, if Matthew rings me and he hears screaming kids in the background, he probably doesn't have that much of an issue as long as the problem gets fixed. Don't know if you heard that down the back. But, so the expectation, I guess, in our organisation is that people are available, because we provide that extremely flexible workplace where, at 9 o'clock I'm dropping off kids, at 3 o'clock I'm picking them up during the middle of the day. We had a preparation call for this panel and I cut it short by half an hour because I wanted to go to the gym. It's all about setting expectations and communicating that I'm available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, sometimes you might ring me and you'll hear strange things going on. But if I know how important it is for you, I'm going to bust my guts to get it fixed for you. So, and that's the same for the rest of the team.
I think that's very similar, and having that relationship with your clients as well is important. I see Sarah Cordner out there, and it reminded me once that some of the relationships we've had over the years, I had my son vomit on me as Sarah rang, and I had to say, look, Sarah, I understand it's important. I just can't deal with it right now. I will ring you back in 15 minutes when we have the vomit cleaned up. So having those relationships with their clients, I think we're all in sort of the same boat. That screaming kids aren't a problem because you know that you're in outside hours. I don't know, how does the legal teams react to kids in the background or vomit emergencies?
No idea. So we definitely have high expectations, and I guess the complication can be multiple time zones, multiple offices. You're working with disparate practice groups, so an IP practice group, a litigation, a regulatory M&A practice group, and so they're not aware of other workflows and other demands. So our workplace is flexible. We generally encourage people to get out the door before 6 if we can, 6 p.m, sometimes 6 a.m. And then we'll obviously then test working remotely, and you have to definitely be in sync with the lawyers, and so you have to be attuned to the fact of their deadlines, and they don't always involve us, so you get a few last minute specials, which are interesting.
to sort of observe how teams fit in. I know certainly at Allen's, we sort of focused on leveraging off the team as a whole, and not only a local team but a national team where we can. Do you guys find that the teams in your workplaces sort of help you get that balance right? And Blair, you touched on that you're available 24/7. How does the team perceive that?
I have to be careful because there are some of the team in the room. Again, I guess because we're all pretty open and we communicate about, our own expectations, and everyone kind of lives the ethic that we're almost like a family. So, other people appreciate that if they ring me at 2:00 in the morning, and when I'm saying I'm available 24/7, this does happen. I'll get a phone call at 2 or 3 in the morning, wakes me up, and I answer it. But they make sure that they've done absolutely everything else they can to not have to do that. And they will get that I'm a little bit grumpy and perhaps might be slurring my words depending on which night they call me. So everyone really appreciates it. And I guess I can compare that to previous experiences. So at EDT, as I said, we're all kind of in that. So the whole company, it's not like we have these official, 9 to 5 business hours. The whole company kind of works global hours. So we're all very appreciative of, life-work balance. But working, for instance, at, some of the big 4 firms who are more set in their ways of a 9 to 5, or as my wife used to describe it, 7 till 11 type work ethic, they don't tend to appreciate it as much. And it's a very hierarchical structure. You've got a partner who, and I'm going to speak very broadly here so that no one gets insulted, but a partner who's done their hard yards, and so they're kind of at the mentality they come in, they're managing and they're winning the work, and they just kind of want the work to get done. So there's that expectation that gets pushed down, and the lower you are in the food chain means the longer hours you work, and the less life-work balance you have. So I guess it depends on the culture of the organisation, and I've worked in several where the cultures are varied, and there's been different levels of appreciation throughout the organisation depending on almost the seniority of the person that you're dealing with. If you've got a really important partner who wants you to do something, you kind of jump and do it. But if you've got a junior expecting you to do something, almost growling at them saying, "Why are you ringing me?" So it can depend on the organisation.
You can also get the juniors that try the growl when they first ring with a request, but hopefully you can bring them into line quite quickly. I think where I am, one of the important things is not only communication between sort of us and them with the lawyers, and about the fact that I've got a doctor's appointment, or I need to, pick up my pet from the vet, or whatever it is, but also within your team have that communication, so that the beginning of the week, Gavin and I might say, "Oh, well, I've got to be out on a Thursday night for something," and he's like, "I've got a cricket meeting on Wednesday." So between that, we work it out, and it works. You sort of pick up each other's, not slack, but downtime when you're living. And I think that works.
I guess the other point that I guess I'd like to make, following up on that, is that for a long time we had that kind of imbalance where, especially in professional services, you're at the end of the food chain. You've got a company that's engaged a law firm that then engages a professional services firm to do the work, and then if you need, I guess there's another level, if you need some hard copy, you then push it even further down the train. But what I always used to encourage with my clients was, well, if you're not comfortable pushing back on your client, I'm happy to sit in the meeting and help you do it. And I think people always looked on that quite favourably, because no one's really comfortable pushing back on their client. But if they don't know why and they can't articulate it, then they're really not going to do it, because it just makes them look bad. Whereas if you're volunteering and showing that you're on the same team, hey, we're all on the same team here, we're all trying to get the same thing done, let me take a bit of the heat for you, I found that to be a really effective strategy.
Thinking about how our roles have evolved over the past, say, 5 or 10 years, obviously, first thing which comes to mind is the technology and how that it's involved. I got an NBN connection put in about 3 weeks ago, and the joke at work was Karan can now respond to emails at 25 megabits per second, which was fantastic. That is quick.
NBN, thanks, mate.
Over to you guys. Angela, you worked from home for about 8 or 9 years, early part of your career. How's it changed from then to now for you?
I think in the early days, technology, I guess, showing my age, technology certainly wasn't up to spec with doing it. But working for a law firm at the time, there was this strong expectation that we need you there. You need to be there. Through one of our big matters, I actually broke my leg, and they bought me a special chair to sit there and do the work so I could continue. But I think as technology is increasing and as more people work remote, I think the trust has become a lot better. And I think moving to an outcomes-based model where as long as you're delivering, then that should be a measure of success, not how many hours you're connected. Because I know I used to get up very, very early in the morning so that I could cover a few spots in my day where my son was going to school or my first coffee break. So as long as you've got outcome-driven results, I think the trust is there. I think we should move to that sort of model. The other thing I wanted to say is I don't think there are a lot more motivators to people than just money. And for me, intrinsic motivation was I went to work wearing pasta necklaces, paper hats, buttons. My son was no wiser. He thought Mummy was going to work with all the great things that he'd done. I was sitting at my desk, no one saw me. But for him, that was amazing. For him to come home at 3 o'clock and say, Mummy, I did this, and for me to take 10 minutes out of my day has made the world of difference in my son. I don't know whether I disappointed anyone in amongst all of that, but I still managed all my workload in that. So I think there are different ways to motivate people, and I think it'll be worthwhile management thinking about those ways going forward.
One of those pasta necklaces today to show us?
Look, I tried to find one. I actually have this colourful bead one, and it's got a paint panel on it. The other one is a picture of Mummy. My husband worked from home and has done ever since I had my son, actually. And so there is a picture at home. I can't find it because we moved to Sydney. Daddy and him playing with rainbows and stuff. This was his kindergarten thing, and Mummy is on a laptop. All his kindergarten pictures is Mummy with her laptop. So I did scar his life a little bit, but I think he's starting to get how valuable that was for him.
Actually, we did talk about this just out the front before we came in, and Angela was talking about that photo, and I said, actually, what I should have done is I should have taken a photo in our family room. We've got a photo wall with about 100 photos up on the wall, one of those kind of montage type things. And I looked at it the other day, and they're all photos kind of up until when I put it up, which was about 2.5, 3 years ago, and there is not a single photo of me because I was always working. So, it's very much a sign of, whether you've got your work-life balance. You reflect on the important things in your life.
But I think we can obviously come out with all our horror stories and our missing photos and our missing opportunities and missed dinners and the list goes on. But the lawyers miss it too. So it's not just us. It's the entire, I think, professional services profession and everything that tentacles from that. And I think the reason partly that drives it, and it's sort of something that you said about being, Angela said about being outcome driven, is that because we're billable hour, because law firms are billable hour driven, that doesn't obviously promote people to end their day sooner because they have a target as a lawyer and they want to achieve it and beat it. So having that, I guess, burden on them means they're not driven to go home early because then they'll just have to work extra long the next day. So I think that's something for all industries to look at that have that model for recording performance.
Getting back to the original question, Karan, which was the point of us talking, but anyway. So a change over the last 5 years, I guess, is flexibility, and that the lawyers are responding and commenting and sending emails as they get them. So they don't necessarily want a response immediately. And so a lot of our responses may be, I'll get back to you tomorrow. So you've got that faith thing in, yes, I've seen it, yes, I'll get back to you, and then you're testing the waters to see what is their response and if it really needs to be done.
Yeah. Look, and I think technology itself has there's been some good things and bad things, but, if you look at the good things, well, I wouldn't be able to do what I do today without, the remote access and so on. I don't have to go into an office. The mobile phone was a great thing initially. I think everyone was pretty excited about mobile phones, and then pretty rapidly people went, well, hang on a second, now I'm available and there's email on it and this isn't so wonderful. But I look at the flip side and, you look at the all the smartwatches and things like that are coming out. And I was really finding it quite an interference in my life, having my smartphone where every time it buzzed in my pocket, I felt like I had to get it out, see whether it was important. And then because you had it out, you may as well just respond. So, you may as well just have it out on the table apparently anyway. I think if you embrace technology and have the right mentality about technology, it can be really beneficial. I know I wear a Samsung watch, whether it's a Samsung or an Apple or whatever. I found that has really changed. Yes, I'm still connected and yes, it still interrupts my life, but I use it in a way that at least I'm not pulling that phone out. And it's not a big interruption, I feel my wrist buzz and I have a quick glance and hopefully no one thinks I'm looking at the time and I'm bored. But it means that I don't have that big interruption because I had found that my habit was that if I got my phone out, I would respond rather than just check the importance. And so now I'm able to do that. So I think as technology evolves, we need to make sure that we use it in a way that's beneficial to our life balance.
And what are your clients doing? Have you seen a change the way they operate?
I saw one sign-off on a client's email, which I really liked. I wondered how effective it was, but I liked the sentiment, which said that they chose to work the hours that they worked, but they didn't expect a response or an action from the email that they'd sent outside of business hours. And it was really refreshing. I still replied at 9 p.m, but it was nice to know I didn't have to. So I think where it can work is where in the subject line you include that information, so you don't actually have to get to the bottom of it and then possibly work out you didn't need to reply. But in the subject line, if you say, not urgent or tomorrow's fine or something to that effect, it's quite helpful. You see it pops up in your inbox, you look at it on your phone, and then you can just put it away.
I think for us to get the balance right, we touched on the use of the mobile phone. Let's talk about the anxiety levels if you were to forget your mobile phone somewhere or had to turn it off for a little while. How does that work for the panel?
I've got a Samsung watch, so if I leave my phone at home, it's still on my wrist, so it's all good. Yeah, I suffer from anxiety if I'm not connected. I think we all have admitted to that. But it's a matter of the right time and the right place. I mean, if the expectation that you have set is that you're contactable and you're not, then clearly, you're going to suffer from that. But if you're suffering because you're on holidays, and you're on a 5-week holiday and you're 3 weeks in and you're still looking at your phone, not looking at anyone in particular, then I think you need to rethink your availability.
I think it's about setting expectations and using out of office wisely. If you say, I'll be checking my emails intermittently, you're setting an expectation that you're probably checking them more often than intermittently, and people will expect that.
Yes, I'm very anxious.
I'm not sure people picked it up, but Blair was talking about me when I was on holidays for 5 weeks. Took me 3 weeks to turn off the phone and not look at it. And the 4th week, I still turned it on once to see what's happening.
There's a very nice island just off Brisbane called Moreton Island, and a certain portion of it does not get phone response. My husband would always book a holiday there if things were getting a bit stressy. So,
don't tell my wife that.
I think we've spoken about sort of flexibility from the workplace and flexibility from the professional to achieve that balance or get that as close to perfect as possible. But to really change the way we work as professionals in the discovery space, we need a shift in the way our lawyers and our clients are thinking about work and the way they're operating. And I think the panel's touched on it. The trick there is education. What are some of the things you guys are doing to help educate your lawyers, your clients, to make sure that they get a balance in life, and you guys too as professionals?
Start when they're young. I think it's just by having an open dialogue constantly, because a particular process on a particular matter may take X hours. On a different matter with a different set of data, you need to re-establish what those timelines are going to be, because they're going to be different. No matter's the same. And you'll build, again, expectations. So it's just always communicating, always asking what they need, finding out what the drop-dead deadlines really are, and working with them, not against them.
My wife would cringe if she heard me saying this on a microphone up and, in front of everyone. But your communication is the key thing that you need to employ. If you just constantly provide feedback about how things are going and asking them and getting information from them, then it's going to work. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that I don't try and hide any of the fact that I'm working from home or these kids in the back. I think a lot of what we try and do in our professional life is we try and act really professionally, which dehumanises people. We're all people, and everyone has a life outside of work. And I think the more that you show of that, the more people appreciate that, and they are more accepting and understanding. So, actually try and open. I think, was it Matthew, were we having a conversation a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about how kind of having to open up to someone and talk about, well, actually, I'm going out to dinner tonight.
You're breaching the containment or the sanctity of home. You have to unlock it, and so you start sharing details of your life. You don't want to, but you have to be open about, well, kids swimming is till this time, so I need a buffer to actually, think and have lunch and stuff, so I'll be available from this time. So,
yeah. Yes. I mean, I have a running gag with one of my clients who rings me. They will ring at 3:30, no other time of the day, 3:30, any day, and especially Fridays. And the first thing that client says is, got the kids yet? And they'll say hello to them in the car while we talk about what the issue is that they're ringing me up for. And I think, if you can make yourself a person and not just, a voice on the end of the phone or whatever it is, then, people are a lot more accepting.
I think adding to that too, that then opens the relationship to sort of say, well, is it really as urgent as what you say? In the software business, you've got things that you'd like that would be better, and then you've got critical failures. And we understand that we would like it to make us coffee and do everything for us, but it's the critical values that, you know, Blair and I are interested in making sure that you guys continue to be successful. And having that element of humanity sort of opens that dialogue and trains them to really say, you know, this is going to cost me my business. This is going to cost me this client. And we will pull out all stops. But it's, hey, I was thinking about this the other day. This would be nice. Once you get to that position, I think it's a lot easier in training people. In saying that, opening yourself as a human goes both ways. I have a particular client in New York. He's a geek like me. He thought it would be very nice for him to share his lab. So when he calls me on Australian hours, I can picture him in his forensic lab doing his work because he wanted to call us through Australian hours. So it goes both ways.
Now, something we spoke about when we were preparing, especially in a law firm, is when you educate your lawyers on the process and then they rotate into a next practice group, and then you have a new set of lawyers who don't know what you do, don't quite understand the process as well, and the unrealistic expectations creep in. Matthew, Ainsley, what do you guys do to sort of tackle that?
So I guess you have to be in sync with the lawyers, so you need to understand their deadlines. You need to subtly test the waters. Shall we go and talk to the senior lawyer? Let's just clarify what you're actually asking, and being upfront and saying, the result set is X. Is that what you expected? You know, shall I hit the print button? You know, da, da, da. But obviously education and the fact that each new lawyer you work with, there's a settling in period of they trust you or they don't trust you or whatever, but you reach a point where you have equilibrium and you understand each other, I think.
I know in the past I've helped run kind of lawyer education sessions about, you know, the eDiscovery process. Do you have that kind of formal, you know, process in place where, you know, post-grad induction, you kind of, you know, try and beat into them what the process is and set some expectations then?
We try not beat. It's
strong term, but
I think it goes sort of two ways. It's helpful to have an overview session to give them the idea of who to call when a hard drive turns up on their desk, or just where to go for further information. But you can't tell them everything they need to know on those sessions, and it's not helpful. They'll just glaze over and you'll lose them. And I think it's the same for more in-depth training, particularly for graduates on rotation. You tell them what they need to know for the matter they're working on and the task they're doing, so they can do it and do it well, and you can work through with them and get what you need. But you don't tell them everything about analytics if they're not using it for that particular task, because when they go off and become a corporate lawyer and go into the world of data rooms, you'll be really disappointed you lost those hours.
We have a story on that where I showed a lawyer the use of analytics on a review platform, and they got really excited and they achieved 300 documents an hour, which was fantastic. They then rotated out, and I got a call, Ainsley, saying, is that available on the Sensorata platform we use? I'm like, well, not really, but we can help you set that up outside if you really want to. Here's the benefit. What I'm trying to get to here is that education sort of always pays off. Those lawyers, young lawyers you train today, will turn out to be senior associates, partners down the track. And the relationship you build with your clients at an early stage, like you said, Ainsley, starting early, will eventually pay off. Just keeping a track of time, I think it's been a useful discussion. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope the panel, the audience has certainly taken stuff out. Just to sum up, back to the panel, what would be the 2 or 3 top things you would recommend we do as professionals to make sure we've got this balance right?
I'll go first, so then I'm done. It's a matter of perspective. So number one, it's perspective. You know, it's life-work balance and appreciate that from other people as well. Number 2 is, you know, as I was saying before, we're all humans, right? And the more that you show that, the more that you can engage in these conversations. And, to throw in another one, use the technology wisely. Don't just use it for the sake of using it. Actually use it to make your life better.
I would say communication and consideration would be my two, that it goes both ways. So if you want someone to be considerate, you need to obviously show that consideration to them.
I would say set some boundaries. I know that sounds quite difficult, especially in law firms, but even back in my day, setting a few of those boundaries early and having the reasons why, the human reasons why, has certainly stood me in good stead. And people understand. They're not always organised, but they do tend to understand.
I'd say transparency, thinking ahead and saying certain milestones, here's what's achievable tonight. This is probably going to take 3 days, working backwards and just being very open with them on here's what is achievable and what plan B is and plan C and plan D.
Thanks. A few others from me. We touched on education, but it's also giving them transparency of the process the best we can, explaining how discovery works, and it's not actually a button which we press and the list comes out the other end. It's giving options when you're negotiating, really working out what their needs are, and to work out what will work for them, and how do you go about setting those. And the trick there is not to assume what you think they might need. Trick is to have that conversation with them and really work out what they need. Leveraging of your teams, where you do have sort of teams spread across different locations, making sure the team's there to support you in achieving the outcome. You're doing it as a group and it's not a one-man show. And what's worked for me on especially large complex matters is agreeing a communication plan where we define what urgent really is and how we will deal with urgent requests. That definition of urgent, whether it's in an email header or whether it's an exclamation mark which comes up on Outlook, really helps us determine what is critical, what's not, and then work to the request in that manner. Open it to the audience if there are any questions.
Some great stories about work-life balance. I'm sure there are heaps in this. I can see many faces with heaps of them.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that because I probably have quite an interesting work-life balance. And Ainsley and Matthew both picked up on it. And it's important for all the junior people entering the industry going forward that the two things that are key for me is the project management. So we work very heavily with project management at the firm. And also the eDiscovery specialists is involved and the LT specialists are involved in the project management of the project. But it's also the joint ownership of the deadlines that are key for me. So if you own that deadline with the lawyers and work to that deadline, as Matthew pointed out, and that's the key. So you say, if you want to deliver that by this date and this time, I need this position at this time, this position at that time, this position at the next time. So you meet those deadlines all the time. And one of the things I find now is that I actually get lawyers phoning me up and saying, we're going to need an extension. And that's sort of a week ahead. They're actually predicting they need an extension because I've given the deadlines there ahead of it. And it's something we work very heavily on, and I'd recommend everybody to sort of try and take that approach and sharing that deadline.
I guess that we always start each matter thinking it's an impossible deadline anyway. So we can't say we can't meet it, which is, the lawyers have to come up with that.
I guess that there's a lot of discussion in the industry about the shrinking size of the legal market and the top end of town firms struggling a bit and competing for those big clients and those big cases. Have yourself or probably Ainsley or Matt felt recently that clients are taking advantage of that to a degree to put more and more pressure, more unrealistic deadlines on their lawyers, and then obviously that flows through to the litigation support groups? And if that's the case, how do you deal with that? Obviously there's discussion about shared ownership of deadlines and so on, but I'm certainly seeing some shorter deadlines and even more unrealistic expectations lately, and I'm wondering whether because clients have that, you know, the power sort of shifted from the law firm to the client, whether that's sort of being taken advantage of, whether consciously or unconsciously.
I think top end of town clients have always expected quality, and that expectation, in my view, hasn't changed. They're still expecting the same quality of work. The timings will really depend on what they're working. So if it's a litigation, timings are a bit more relaxed. With more activity in the regulatory space, timings are a bit more tight. So I think it comes down to the type of matter. Not sure whether you guys have a different view.
My short answer was yes.
In my 6 years, I haven't noticed a dramatic change. It's always felt that each client is a little bit different. Some are totally unrealistic on time and cost, and some are fantastic. So
I'd just add to that answer. The thing that I think has changed is that there are multiple deadlines, because the clients are making more strategic decisions about costs, so there's more pins down and chopping and changing than historically, which is much harder to resource, because you've got to have people who know that matter available when the pins go down and they come back up. So that's I think one consequence of that tight market.
For those who are managing subordinates or other people in their team, how do you deploy, or what's your expectation of their work-life balance or life-work balance, and encouraging them to, you know, seek a life-work balance and push back with the lawyers?
I'm just going to quickly jump in and say well done for picking up on life-work balance.
Definitely that breaching the containment of your life, you get to know everyone's movements in their lives as well, and so you have to be transparent about this jigsaw or patchwork of capacity, and you have to be fair and balanced. And with the flip side, we have a model where we have people dedicated to matters, so you're going to have lulls and you're going to have peaks where it's not always fair. And so the downside of our model is, so you have people who aren't busy, but they can't pick up a job at 9 o'clock at night because they have no idea what the background story is, so it's difficult.
Just from a kind of a global perspective, I work quite a lot with one of my colleagues that's in London. And the only time that I find it really hard to manage his life-work balance is when I don't know what he's got on. So really it is, again, about communication. If he communicates, you know, what meetings he's got, even what he's got outside of work, you know, I've got something on with the kids or the family or whatever. If I know that, then I can help him manage it. But if I don't know, then that's when, you know, you start to encroach. So just try and break down those barriers. It's not so much about, you know, your private life is private and your professional life is your professional life. It's like, well, you're a person and, you know, what's going on, and let's kind of fit stuff in.
I think it's really important to lead by example as well. So I have to be fairly careful with a few of my ex. But taking some of the harder ones. So while I would have that time with my son, I'm the one who would pick up at 9 o'clock and go till 3 in the morning to say goodnight to Matthew. So also ensuring that, you know, they knew that at 9 o'clock, that's when my son got dropped off. If they had something or they had a particular deadline, we had one lady who used to work for us who had to be home to cook dinner for her husband. That was part of their culture. We respected that, you know, and it's that give and take wherever possible, like Ainsley said with Gavin, you know, making sure that they're getting a bit of a life and you're not the one leading it up. So for me, it's always been leading by example.
I think, just from my perspective, the expectation of the team is what the firm would expect of everyone, of all the employees, which is deliver a high quality result to clients. On complex matters, we try and resource with multiple people, so we don't try and get ourselves into a situation where we bottleneck with one person or sort of where they're not available. On the simpler matters or the smaller matters, it's normally manage up. So, like Angela said, it's as the manager, I would have that discussion with the lawyers or the client and to try and negotiate a more realistic deliverable timeline.
I find that there's almost a direct correlation between the quality of my relationship with the lawyer and how many requests I get, from the 6 p.m. to being done at 9 a.m. and even just being let into their world and their general deadlines. Do you find that as well? What are practical ways that you build relationships with the lawyers? Do you think even that there might be some radical things that can be done with the structure of our teams within firms in order to increase the chances that we have to build relationship with lawyers?
Yes, you're right. To me, there's a subtlety in, so how do you kind of hang out and get in sync with those lawyers and pop around and see them without saying, I'm about to go home and see you later and it's someone else's problem. But there's a level of faith that you have to build with them and they get that trust with you. So to me, it's checking in with them basically and testing the waters, what's happening, or doing that remotely and saying, this sounds like it's a really big job, let's look at it tomorrow, or let's have a call now and go through it. So I don't have a perfect answer there.
Yeah, look, I've found that just taking the step, no matter how big or how small, but doing something together. So if it's a lawyer that's rung you and said, I need this now, while I didn't work in a law firm, when I was in professional services, make the effort to go over to their office, meet them, talk through it. And then they feel part of the process. They own it too. They're not just throwing something over the fence.
And I think what you said before about showing the human side, so that if you can actually, say, well, I'm going home now, and they say, oh, where's home? And you end up talking about a restaurant or something, and you just end up having a relationship that isn't just transactional at work. You actually find out about them and they find out about you. It definitely helps.
Beer helps.
I don't know if it's because we've all been around for such a long time, we're all dinosaurs, but we all worked like 15-hour days, 12, 15-hour days in the old, 30 years ago. And whether it's a new thing, I now practice life-work balance, but that took me 20 years to get to that point. And whether young people now still have to do the yards, because if they're going to be promoted, they still need to be doing some of that time. They can't just straight away walk into a position where they are getting life-work balance. I don't know, is it a sign of the times, or is it?
I don't know. I think some of the younger generation, the very young generation, walk in, think that they can swan in, spend a bit of time on their phone, and they're out again. And they've worked a really hard day. I think that's a sign of my age, more so. But I think that there is that, and it'll be interesting to see if that comes through in the legal profession, where the latest generation, are they going to work the very, very long hours to get themselves up that next step and outside the law clerkships? Are you seeing a difference?
I'm not going to answer that question, just because I was going to say something else. But I think there's also the issue of the concept of, the older people that have been there and done it saying, well, you need to do it too because I did it. And I think we need to question whether that's right.
Or that being outcome oriented. Yeah. If more firms and companies could be more outcome oriented, then it wouldn't matter when it got done, who did it, where they were. I think as you get older, you realise that, that's exactly it. As long as it gets done, who really cares? But when you're younger, you're stuck in the paradigm of, I'm trying to build a career, I'm trying to, show that I'm here, I'm working really hard, and you're more worried about career, whatever that is, than you are about, just getting the job done, making people happy, and then getting on with life. I don't know whether there's actually a shift. I think maybe as we get older, we just change our own priorities.
All right. I'd like to thank the panel for their input. If there are no other questions, we'll call it the end of the session.